Cool. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm David.
And I'm Kyle.
Yeah, KL and I are good friends, at least I hope. And KL, I know, is capping. Um, and I am just some unrelated guy, and I used to do a little bit of debate. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to have a short discussion or description about um, how to do matter filing well, which is useful to in the lead up to tournaments. And it's really helpful because if you don't know how to do a matter file, it can feel really daunting, like you have to learn everything in the world. So I'm going to give just 3 quick tips to prioritize matter filing well and then use it better. And then we're going to, after that, do a short prep of a motion that I matter filed a long time ago. And then we're going to use that as a practical example. So if that's good, we'll just get stuck into it. So what is matter filing? Before I give tips, what is matter filing? Matter filing is not a research paper. It's not a review of related lit, like some of you might be familiar with in university, where you just collect everything in the field that's relevant. Matter filing is about getting 1 to 2 useful sentences in a motion and trying to do that again and again. It's trying to condense and learn as much information that's useful to a variety of different topics. And matter filing, importantly, should be a part of your regular process. Because if you're just like using ChatGPT or something to summarize the information, what you will actually find is you will end up with something really long that takes a long time to search through and it's not really practically useful. So what is a matter file? A matter file is essentially both the process of writing it, which loads that context into your brain, and the process of running through facts in order to get them into like something ready for you to pull from really quickly into a document or into your speech. An example of this would be like if you're the type to read research articles related to the topic, let's say on AI, you don't actually need to explain what a neural network is in terms of back propagation and feed forward networks in order to explain the effects of AI in a certain topic or a certain discussion. Your objective should be to get the simplest explanation to something useful rather than something that's nice to know. And you should have it already preloaded such that it's very quick or fast for you to change contexts. So, having said that, what is my credence? What is my background? What's my ethos for writing matter files? Is I've written quite a few matter files, none I think as widely shared or as impactful as Ryan Lafferty's matter files, but nonetheless I've written some very large ones to prepare for tournaments. So, for example, in the lead up to UADC 2021, our matter file was around 300 pages. And your matter file can consist of both prepping for a motion, so it's directed by the motion itself that you're using to direct generating arguments and insights, or it could be just a general exploration of a country or a topic. So now that we have that out of the way, first, just some practical matters before you get into the tips is you have to think about it in terms of a document that you've printed out. A lot of majors nowadays don't allow you to search through old PDFs anymore unless there are like explicit accessibility requirements. I know that in Worlds, since I'm part of the CAP for Worlds, we will not allow that unless there are certain accessibility requirements, depending on what guidelines we publish later. So you should be aware that if you're like lugging around the briefcase of this, we'll have to flip through the pages manually. There's no control F. And another thing would be that you have to write your notes to be reread. If your notes are incomprehensible to you right now, they certainly won't be understandable to you 30 days to 2 to 3 months from now. Okay, so now that we've said that, 3 tips to do matter loading well. I don't have a PowerPoint for this because this is all just like facts that I just not, there's no curriculum in how to matter load well. So the first tip is you have to understand the coverage, and you have to matter load for things that the debate is likely to be about or that debates are likely to be about. So one key rule I always had was that if you're going to a different country, know about the current events in the country that you're going to. Another one would be you want to have like a proper noun or some fact or related event about every country in the world that's like above a certain population level. Like it just sounds really unconvincing if you're talking about the prime minister of like Armenia and you don't know their name. So you need to have, and this is about debate in general, you need to have a coverage that's broad, right? Something much more broad than, say, something for an academic research, which tends to be extremely deep and extremely narrow. One way to think about this is to use the framework of known knowns, known unknowns, unknown knowns, and unknown unknowns. So you have information that you know, that's known knowns, and you have information that you maybe weren't thinking about that you had awareness of, but when you think about it, you do. So unknown knowns. But the two things you want the research on are things you know that you're not aware of, and that will require you to, if you've lost emotion on this before, or you encountered it in training and you just didn't have a good explanation, you have no excuse, and you should immediately shore up those weaknesses. So one of the most useful pieces of feedback from around is just knowing that there's an area of conversation here that you don't know anything about. So you have to resolve known unknowns as soon as they come up to you, which is useful, which is why it's useful to go to prep tournaments and useful to spar with other teams, is their information coverage will be different. And then you also want to minimize unknown unknowns by like making consuming information passively a part of your daily lifestyle. So what I did before was I actually removed all the meme pages I liked on Facebook, and I only liked news sites. And also same for YouTube, so that whenever I would just like be in my free time, I would just passively absorb new information about the world and new leads to get more, to turn an unknown unknown into a known unknown. That's my first piece, which is your matter file should have the right coverage. It's not going to be useful if it's just about math facts that will never be part of a debate. The second piece of advice is you want to make your matter file useful. So when you're writing down or summarizing an article, you should in your mind have a motion that you would use this information for, right? So this is because if you can't think of its relevance to you or your life, or you can't think of a way you'd use it, this is useless information for the purposes of debate. It might be very enriching, but it just won't help. So it helps to, when you're thinking about going, when you're working forward, so you're forward chaining, which is you're working from information and you're turning that into something useful for debate, is you think of practical applications like, can I think of 3 motions I'd use this fact? Or can I think of an argument that this fact would allow me to unlock? Because facts can have 2 purposes in debates, right? They either give you the base premise to work with, which is really analytically important, in which case they unlock certain things you would have not known before, or they make something more convincing. Like maybe you would make the same claim, but the claim is now much more easy to understand because you have the example of, oh, this recession happened in this country. And that's a practical example rather than an abstract recessioning happening somewhere. The final tip I have, and this is just so Kyle isn't staring lovingly into my eyes for the rest of the session, before we get into the case build, is when you bring up your matter file, you should also reflect about what that fact is saying about society or about the world that it's in. So, for example, if you have a fact like X amount of people have been pulled out of poverty in the last few years, that should update you or give you information about how many people are happy or how many people are sad. And that would help you make a claim about if people in general in society are optimistic, which is a fairly commonly made claim in like philosophical debates. So even if it's a development studies motion, the characteristic of a good debater is that they can reflectively think about how things apply to other bits of the world or other aspects of society. So it's why even though there's no like prime minister of feminism, feminism is still a topic you should matterload about, and it's still something that has a deep literature behind it, which means you should be matterloading on the social movements that concern it, or like thought experiments like analogous to abortion or to adoption and antinatalism. Like these things are still something you should matterload on, and they're an area of active investigation and research in society. So like feminism, philosophy, art and culture, these are also, even soft topics should be matter loaded on, because there's still quite a lot of deep research to do that informs your arguments and makes them socially aware. That's why a lot of the time in a narrative motion, people will feel it's hard to pin down arguments. This is not just because those motions are inherently soft or inherently abstract, but because you maybe lack the background to pin it down to something more concrete, in the way that you might for an econ motion or a tech motion. Okay, so now that we've talked a little bit about how to make a good matter file, we'll run through a quick example. Sorry, I think KL, I think you'll have to be the one to share it, because I don't think I have permission on this laptop, like not the Zoom, but the laptop itself. So I think KL, you'll have to share the motion.
Sure.
Yep. But the motion we're going to do is one that we've already prepped. It's let me just pull it up. Thank you, KL. So this was a motion I prepped in UADC, in the lead up for UADC. And it's about a topic that is fairly complicated because it requires quite a few different moving parts. So for now, we'll briefly just go through the government side. So KL, why don't you start us off by talking about this motion? And I can start the 15 minutes now.
Yeah, so from the get-go, you understand that the debate is really about how people view things more than an actual implementation. So it's how people view space exploration in the past, how people are likely to view it in the future. And it's really more about changing the perspectives of what space exploration is. And I think the starting point for the debate is always, what does space exploration look like right now? Or how does the securitization affect our view of it? And then we move on to how the narrative evolves because of that.
Mm-hmm. So this is a good point. One of the things that a matter file can help you in doing is help you prioritize which things are debatable. And so it might seem like just limiting it to narratives may make it soft, but it's a narrative about a very, very serious thing. So securitization is like a discursive thing. It's how an issue is constructed as a matter of national security. And one thing that we did in this matter file that we would do in any debate is have a really concrete picture about securitization. To me, the thing that always comes to mind first is Cold War era discourse when we're thinking about securitization. And if you think about that, that allows you to unfurl a lot of very good arguments. Like, for example, how in the Cold War, research into space technology, research into satellites and stuff eventually translated into benefits for people. Like you have a cell phone, you have fast Wi-Fi, and that comes because we launched satellites into space that we improved on and iterated on, or even microwaves, which came from military research.
So I think that's a good point. And the starting point of any matter file is important, because if you are very confused about where you're starting, like you look at the motion, you're like, what is this motion about? It's very hard for you to grasp arguments, even if you have an idea of, like, let's say, what to run. So I think we can move on to that actually. So
Yeah.
we mainly talk about how this narrative looks like, how is it likely to evolve. And then I think the good part about this, or end of dissecting any motion with a matter file, is that you really have to look at the problems, because the motion wouldn't exist without any problem.
That's exactly right. So when you think about the problems of space exploration in status quo, right, it would be it's there's no focused push like we used to have with NASA. It's being done by a lot of different actors, like Blue Origin spending billions on like thrusters and spacesuits, but these might already exist in some other capacity in some other organizations. I mean, certainly NASA already has enough to send some people into space. But also there are some problems with legislation and the government not being as active on regulating third-party externalities like space pollution, which might make it harder and more expensive to send out satellites into space in the future. And it's also kind of worrying, right? Because whoever gets into space exploration first might end up with a monopoly on the future resources on other planets. So this makes you think, right? How do people think about space exploration now? Well, it's mostly scientific and technological, and that leads to it being treated like a normal tech industry where it's very fractured and there's a lot of startups. And then when you analogize these problems to the motion, you can draw out the difference between the tech startup scene and the space and how they have very different requirements for industries, which is why they can't be treated in the same way.
So I think David makes a very good point, and I want to link this to what he mentioned as one of the tips a while ago, which is you have to have a good idea of the facts. So when we talk about the current problems, we're just looking at the facts right now, what's happening, what are the trends, because these help establish what we'll be arguing later on. But to get to those facts, you first need to do your research. You need to know the unknowns and be able to at least put that into writing, because those are what's going to help you create some sort of idea when you're prepping, when you see the motion for the first time. So I think we
Yeah.
can move on, yeah, to the arguments.
So when you look at the actual arguments, right, like what claims are you actually making? You're really just saying securitization changes policy. Of course, you could say, well, securitization makes people more self-actualized about how they think about space, but that's not really realistic or practical in a motion where you can tease out some pretty hard and physical impacts. So how did we argue? Well, we said, first of all, this improves the level of importance we hold on this. We care a lot about security, and we care a lot about the military, and we care a lot about space investments. So if we care about them in the same way, then we would treat them in the same way, which is we augment it with a significant amount of government regulation. And you notice that it fits very neatly into the problems we placed earlier. We said there's not enough regulation, and if it's a matter of national importance, we place regulation. The second way we said it changes these policies is, well, it increases the funding and opportunity available, which is done in a distributed way so that it reduces monopolies, like how there's a very active bidding process amongst different arms companies in the arms and security industry. So you will get lots and lots of funding and lots of opportunity because it's also seen as a very safe stock. Right? So loaded behind these statements is actually a lot of analogies to the real world, which is why it's important to do your matter loading beforehand. Of course, you can say these, you can derive these from first principles, but you need to have the background in the world to understand that this actually exists in some limited form elsewhere. Otherwise, you're talking out of your ass and you won't be as convincing. Another thing would be that it makes it easier to justify a check and balance. So, of course, the point, is like, well, we have the government being more interested in placing regulations, but also the capacity for them to do regulations, especially in other countries, especially in regimes where we might be worried about misuse. Now it's no longer just private property. It's an issue of national interest. And so there might be some interest in or some capability to take away private rights now that you're doing this, which would be good because, again, it would stop monopolies. It would stop the redundant competition and make the whole industry a lot more efficient.
And I think what you take away from that when the policy changes do happen is, I'm pretty sure what most of you know, are the impacts in the debate. What actually changes after we implement such a policy or reframe our point of view. And we got a couple of things. So first is you could make space exploration safer. Second is that it could increase competitiveness, which makes things generally cheaper, which also leads to the third impact, which is that this could be a spillover towards other forms of research, like what David mentioned in the past, that they made microwaves before or cell phones. They could make probably high capacity computers nowadays, or even other forms of energy that's much more efficient or more green, for example. And lastly is that it also democratizes space exploration, which probably would not have happened on the alternative. And all of these things are important because this is how you're able to derive what the outcome of the debate is actually trying to get at, for your side at least. And again, you wouldn't be able to run these things in sort of a persuasive manner if you did not have any examples to back them up, which is the reason as to why you should be matterfiling, right? Because maybe you can extrapolate that, yeah, you get cheaper goods or you get spillover or you get to democratize the industry. But what does this actually look like if you don't actually have the facts or the trends to back you up, then you also become less persuasive, which is why matter filing these things to supplement your first principles and your claims is important.
Yeah, I think KL brings up a good point, and I think it's also important to note that matter filing will do different things for you at different points in your career. I think when you're very new to debating, matter filing is helpful for understanding which arguments are commonly run and what incentives actors normally have, what capacities they normally have. But when you get really good, or when you at least have a familiarity with the stock arguments that you normally see in debates, is matter filing helps you make them relatable to a judge and helps you tailor the idea to a specific debate. So let's say we had a different motion that wasn't about specifically space exploration, but you could still use the analogies we talked about in early space exploration for the securitization of, say, nuclear energy research or the securitization of GMO research, where you could still talk about new hydroponics technology and have an efficient energy creation, even if it's not exactly space research that you're securitizing, but some other industry that you're securitizing, because you have access to these facts. So again, um, part of matter filing is having a really good and dynamic understanding of the world that you can sort of swap out and use in different ways. But anyway, let's complete the argument so that we don't waste people's time. So why is it that this is really important? So one of the useful things about matter filing is that it also helps you like just pull out numbers, pull out facts. Um, and you can argue, oh, it benefits a scale of billions of people, right? There's a huge amount of things you can get from atmospheric regulation. You could get the quality of life that you could use to improve satellite and Wi-Fi and electricity coverage. So it's technology, right? And the massive benefits of technology to people now. So it's already something that says it pays for itself. It justifies its own funding. But you could also argue that this benefits people in the future. You don't just have to tier impacts along different kinds of impact, but also impacts to different people. And this is one thing you can unlock because reading the literature on securitization, reading the literature in space, is it sort of does the segmentation for you. It tells you how people in industry, how people who have it as their jobs think about these different impacts. And so you could talk about space, you could talk about lunar colonies, you could talk about how people in the future are also more important for a variety of reasons, and we have obligations to them, so on and so forth. Anyway, Kale, I think now's a good time to stop and take a step back, and let's go to point E, which I think is really important. And this is maybe the thing I want to end our prep on. One of the really good bits that you can use matter filing to do is to speed up the time you spend thinking about other people's arguments. Preemptions are especially important because you want to make your argument with your best possible preemption in mind. And this saves you a lot of the effort and a lot of the time, because it's one of the most time consuming things to do in a round, right? You're listening to someone, you're thinking about rebuttals on the spot instead of processing how to deliver your own arguments better. So if you can already in prep say, why can't science and tech coexist with securitization discourse? Well, because they come from very different traditions. They have limited political capital to expend on certain types of advertising. They have limited or even like mutually exclusive styles of management and styles of ownership that make it impossible to do both. So that's why you can't co-opt it. And we can run through the other preemptions. But I think this is showing really just the importance of matter filing. Is again, when you're thinking about it in a motion, what would op run? Well, you've already thought about what would op run. Maybe because you've already pretended to be op, or because you're deliberating on it.
Yeah, and the last thing I want to add, just a conclusion to everything, both of this prep and also of matter filing, is that matter filing is a lifestyle that you choose to do. It's a habit. So you wake up every day, you do your routines, you go to work, you go to class, you go to an event. But matter filing is just like a routine. When you're in the train, you're in the cab, and you're on the way to work or whatnot, or you have some free time, a lot of us tend to just scroll on short form videos on YouTube or whatnot. But a good habit that a lot of older debaters used to do as well is to just read random articles, or not necessarily just random articles, but read on topics they may not know about from simple sources like Wikipedia, because Wikipedia gives you a very simplified version more often than not of like what you want to know. So if you're just curious about something, it leads you in that direction, and it builds over time because one link leads to another link, leads you to more places. And so it's really about making it a part of your lifestyle. I understand if you can't always have time to like type everything down or like write everything down, but one good thing about remembering it and memorizing it is that it really helps you put it into action when you need to, because it's an instant snap in your head when you already know these things very well. So yeah.
Great. Okay, I think now's a good time to call it a day. And I hope you guys learned something. I hope you enjoyed. And see you around.
Yep. Thank you so much, David. All the best as well.
Cheers.